go to the cloud.
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to meeting 51, April 26th, Tinkerbell contributors meeting. Glad to see everybody on the call. We just going through the agenda. If you don't have the link, I'll post it in chats. We do have is this Jeremy, a permanent link here, a temporary Zoom link?
This one's a one-off, and so
okay.
But works for the moment.
Okay. Perfect. So we did notify in Slack, and this link is out there. Awesome. Recording started. So don't see any new faces. Glad to see those that have attended. If you're watching this in the future, we do have a code of conduct. Please check it out in the agenda docs. All right. Jumping into show and tell. Anybody have any items for show and tell? I'll kick us off. Actually, I have one. Let's see. I think just yesterday or today, I got a PR merge in Hook that will send the workflow container logs back to Boots. Just FYI. So if you do see somebody in the community who needs to troubleshoot, they should be able to tail the Boots logs. And you can see them out. This just gets us back to par with what we had with the previous Aussie. As I noted in the PR, maybe not the ideal or long-term solution for sure, but I think it does get us a little bit better UX. People can they don't have to have console access, at least to see part of it. Now, if anything fails prior to workflow runs, well, you got to go to the console, but yeah, that's another problem to solve as well. But anyway, so FYI, that did get merged. So if you want to, we don't have a released Hook. Maybe that's another top item for topic, but you would have to build it yourself and run it. So just FYI, if you're watching this in the future, how do I use it? You have to build it locally and put it somewhere available. So yeah, Pooja.
I think we talked about this a little bit briefly before. We were talking about having SSH keys pushed into Hook, into via hook.yaml, maybe pass it through via Boots or something, because that's one thing that coming up is it would be nice to be able to SSH into Aussie once it comes up, to see any issues that are happening there. But I think the question was, how do we push the keys? Like, what's the best way to have the keys pushed on there? Do we get it through an environment variable via Boots and then pass it on over to installers Aussie and onto Hook that way? Or it's something to discuss, not right at this moment. I mean, the logs are obviously helpful, but that's one thing that does keep coming up, is people wanting to be able to SSH into Aussie.
Yeah, that's a great one. If you don't mind, I'll throw that on the tail end of our topics today. I think that's a great one. We can come back to it if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Cool. Any other show and tell items anybody's interested in bringing up? Chris, you've got a lot of, I don't see anything in there. You've had a lot of awesome work in hilo lately. Anything interested in?
Yeah, I wanted to share just that there's a PR that's gone in that basically introduces Cobra and Viper so that we can kind of standardize around CLI args and consolidate or isolate configuration as a distinct concern in that service. I spoke to Micah. It's something that we probably want to do across the board, but Hegel's, I suppose, a bit of a simpler service, so it's a little bit easier to do there. And then that's getting wired up. There's another PR to wire that up, so that's kind of useful. It does deprecate some of the old variables in favor of a standardized approach. They still exist. in a new form, and it's backwards compatible, so things won't just break. But the intent would be to eventually delete those ASAP. That's all documented in the -H menu when you spin it up, so you can go take a look at that. And then I'm doing some extra work in Hegel just to kind of get rid of package level state and whatnot. There's some other similar work going on in Boots, I think, that Micah has. So yeah, eyes on those PRs as and when they come through would be great.
Right on. Awesome. Very cool. Any other, I feel like this last couple of weeks, there's been a lot of just general movement in the project. Anybody else want to bring up any other show and tell items? All good. We got a lot of topics, so why don't we jump right in? New org issues.
Yeah, I could throw my name on that one.
Okay.
Yeah, this came out of the other day in the triage party. We ran into the same problem. The calendar link was broken. The Zoom link was broken. We had a conversation about during the triage about some of the robot generated security issues that were being mentioned, or like the, update your dependency kind of dependabot. That's what I was looking for, issues. And so it created 2 new org issues for us to address that in the future. For the calendar Zoom thing, we talked about there's got to be some CNCF way to just get this done. I was just looking at CNCF, this location here. There's a whole bunch of groups. I don't know what we would need, maybe a Tinkerbell. I linked in the Zoom chat. There's dev groups, there's user groups. So if we can get one of those together, then maybe we'll have a working calendar, and maybe we'll have working Zoom in the future without having to worry about shuffling things as names and faces change. The security groups, and so the way that I went about this is I opened up issues in org, which I think is probably the way for us to organizationally get things moved across like this. The security group one, that's something we should probably figure out. I don't know if we can do that today, but maybe we can, because we don't have a place, we don't have a time and place to discuss things outside of this meeting, and like cross org and cross, just folks who are contributing to this project, wherever they're coming from. We need like a high level organization strategy. And I think security groups, and I highlighted road mapping. I'll just move that up and I'll just like jump right into it. I think that those are 2 places where we want to have an extra set of meetings where we're just, there's no preamble, we're just talking it through. Maybe we're writing up some docs. So maybe I just throw it out there. Who wants to sign up for that? Like we're the folks who are joining these calls the most. Is it good to establish that here and now, or is this something where we should call attention to the org issue and have folks jump on that?
I think, Micah, didn't you a while back create a similar issue somewhere? That might be good to tag those up.
Yeah, I think I did. I might want to separate the security and then the roadmap issues, just because they might be the same group of people, but like they have a little bit orthogonal concerns. With the security one, I'm on the Kubernetes security committee, or the product security committee. So we have monthly meetings, but that's a much larger project with a lot more scope. And being pre 1.0 for Tinkerbell, I don't know that there's enough to justify a separate meeting for that. It might just be, again, we can decide outside of this call, but it might be something like, once we have governance roles bootstrapped, maintainers, or certain maintainers of certain core repos, maybe Tink. Again, maybe core, core projects like Tink Boots. I don't know, but some of those types of repos might be a list with a security inbox. And then we can just have something low effort where, hey, if you were going to report a security issue, we'll triage it and come up with a fix and get it out. I don't, there's a lot of directions we can go with that, like distributor lists and all that stuff. I don't know that that's necessary at this point. But as far as road mapping, that could be public. And so that could probably be just separate from the security stuff.
Yeah, I'd go with kind of look and see if we get a lot of security stuff, then that warrants, it's kind of own thing, then sure, let's do it. But I think just getting kind of the bare minimum, some way for people to report security stuff in the right way. And then if we start getting stuff or we have to-do items, then we start meeting and we need to meet, then we meet. But yeah, I don't know if at the moment it makes sense to throw something else on there. And also agree, like probably get the governance pushed through and then go from there as well.
Yeah, that was the main thing I was thinking is like what solves this is if at the bottom of Tinkerbell.org, what is the word? At the bottom of the page, if there's a security link like that, that's when we'll know that we've solved this problem. And in the GitHub issue, I linked it in the Zoom chat also. I don't know that it's the right time for us to be meeting individually or like collectively, but if something comes up, there needs to be a way to figure that out. If you can leave any thoughts on that, Micah, with regard to what you were just saying, and higher level Kubernetes involvement, those might be our answers, might just stem from that.
Yeah, I think for us it's going to be a lot simpler. Like we don't need a bug bounty program. We don't need like a distro list. And so we're honestly, once you have a security inbox, it's going to be mostly like DMARC records not set on your domain and like just stuff like that. Yeah, clickjacking on Tinkerbell.io, like that's what most of the email is going to be. So yeah, it's going to be really low volume, I think. But it would be good to have a process to say, hey, if we get an issue, here's how we disclose it. Like, do we make a pre-announcement? Do we just make an announcement? Do we want to get CVEs allocated? Kind of stuff.
Do you know where the roadmap issue is that you were talking about? I did find the proposed Boots roadmap issue that had bunch of bullets on it. I'll link that in our doc, but if we can find any other roadmap related issues that exist, then we can sort of coalesce all those together. But so on the topic of figuring out a roadmap thing, yeah.
Chris, I think you had a roadmap issue created in hilo, yeah?
Yeah, there's a couple of points at the end of the here to do related to that as well.
Okay. Just something to link together.
I just scanned just searched the weekly meeting docs, and June 22nd last year, I asked this question, just security issue management. I didn't open an issue at the time, but just said, we need a process. So thank you for opening the issue. And yeah.
With the issue, there's, I think, a better shot of it being collectively addressed.
Oh, you know what I did do? I did open one on Tink.
Yeah. 508 on Tink. Yes. There's an issue. Yeah.
That was before the org repo was revived.
Okay.
So that has some steps, I think, that are probably good for us just as next steps.
Yes. Awesome. All right, cool.
Maybe I'll throw out there, is there anyone on the call now that is interested in leading out this? Because that would be super awesome. It doesn't have to be, just curious
I'd be willing to help, but I don't want to do it all by myself.
That's fair.
I'm very willing to participate. I'd love to participate, but I'm not sure. I don't know how I feel about championing because I don't understand it necessarily.
That's fair. All right. I think that's good to know. People are willing to get behind a champion. We're still looking for our champion though, which is totally fair. Just wanted to throw it out there. Sorry, anything else, Marcus?
Yeah, just on the road mapping one, if there's any other issues, let's like add it to the doc so that, oh, sorry, I think I dropped the wrong one in there. I saw, Chris, I saw the ones that you put in Hegel, like the tracking issues. A way that I think we can handle that is with milestones. And I can create, I believe I can create milestones for those versions, and then we can figure out how to associate it. It's one of like the problems with using these these like add-on features of GitHub is, does everyone have access to assign things? And if not, do we have robots in place to help us figure that out? So how do you feel about milestones being the way that we accomplish that?
Definitely. I mean, issues, I think, have a time and a place, but they're not actually good for everything, in my opinion. They can be a bit cumbersome. Anyway, I just threw that up there to keep notes, more or less, and keep it public so people could see my train of thought. So yeah, let's switch it up.
All right. Yeah, I can create, it was that 0.7 and 0.8, right?
Correct.
All right.
And that was mainly as well for the let's advertise deprecation and removal of CLI and environment variables. I didn't want to get lost.
Yeah, that makes sense too, because you can't really, once you create a milestone, there's a description for it. But so in that description, I'll link back to your issue so we can like track change log type stuff in there. That sounds good. I think those are all the issues that I wanted to bring up. But again, if there was another roadmap issue that was created in the past, add it to the doc so we can tie it all together. And ultimately, yes, we need to like figure out a time and space where we can get together. I want to be involved in that, and whoever else wants to be involved in that sort of road mapping session, like let's do that.
Cool. Any other thoughts or comments? Thanks, Marcus. All right, Micah, new BMC controller repo.
Yeah, I might actually jump ahead to the org one first, since we're kind of on org topics.
Sure.
So Jacob, thank you for opening that, doing all the legwork. So I'm just building on all Jacob's legwork of role bootstrapping. He opened that 25, almost a month ago, 25 days ago, April 1st. And we've got respondents from all but 3 folks, and the 3 folks who haven't responded have like one issue that they opened on a repo. So unless anyone else like objects, I sort of feel like if folks have had a month to respond that haven't, that's okay to move forward. And if they do speak up and say that they want to get involved, I think that's okay too later. But I think that we're in a pretty good place. So I am just making a motion to go forward with the current list.
I will second that motion.
Because I think we have a pretty good set of folks involved right now. And we can obviously add more because we have criteria for doing that, graduating folks.
Yeah, 100%. So it is on my list, action items starting today to find those next steps, which are going to be like my initial thoughts are we got to plumb in the kind of reviewers and approvers into Mergify. We've got to get like the actual GitHub org teams created, get people in there. So I will start working, I think either Marcus with you or maybe Jeremy or somebody that kind of has org owner level permissions to get everybody put in and get their stuff going. So yeah, I'll jump on that and I'll post in the Slack channels and whatnot as things go along, or in the issue as well. But yeah, hopefully my goal is hopefully by next meeting in 2 weeks that everybody will be in place, they'll have their permissions, and we can really start to fly. So.
Cool, awesome. Yeah, so the other issue that I just wanted to highlight was that issue for a request for a new repo. I'm not super like committed to the name. It would just, I think someone brought it up last time and I liked it. But
I did
yeah.
create the repo.
Oh, you did?
I just didn't make it public yet. So
Okay.
let me, I think I was trying to figure out what sort of teams and collaborators we could do. So I mean, I can push the buttons on it now.
Is that, I mean, yeah, you could make a public, maybe that's just something you and I can, when we're doing governance, if you're up to it, Marcus, to do governance with me, we can add roles and whatnot to it. Does that seem reasonable?
Yeah, some initial set with what we have is I guess what
Sure.
we'll just need to start with. Writers, triagers, maintainers, admins are the groups that we have today. And if I just click all the buttons, they will have all the roles. I'm not sure if that's what we've done in other projects. If those exact groups have been added to everything.
Marcus, do you know the I know that Thomas had worked with Matt Anderson about some tool that we use in EM for like permissions and labels and all that good stuff. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes, it was brought to my attention the other day regarding Equinix Labs. That's a possibility. I don't know if I think that project might not be public though.
Oh,
Yeah, I don't think that was a project. I think that was just some tool that some people have access to, some SaaS, and it just makes managing permissions and labels and stuff like that kind of much easier.
Oh, if it's just, you're saying it's like a GitHub action service. There was some tool that I was introduced to the other day that was like its own GitHub repo.
No, it wasn't that. Let me see if I can dig up the thought of it. I remember like when we had issues before, like when we first like open source all this stuff, we had teams that were from like the Packet and like EM days. And so those teams were kind of synced over to Tinkerbell and they made no sense. And so then Thomas went through some process of kind of reworking all that stuff. And it was just kind of easier to do it all from this one tool, some SaaS. And it can kind of like make all the repos, you know, have the same teams and same labels, and then you kind of manage things a little easier there. And I think like GitHub
sounds
actually,
nice.
yeah, I think what I've looked into like some Probot settings we could do also. The issue with that is like you can't quite, I think, invite people or you can't manage teams nicely to there. But that's also another option. There's like some Probot settings app or something that we can do within the repo.
Oh, can you send me a link to that?
Yeah, it's the same thing we use for like this. It's the framework we use for the DCO bot.
Okay.
What else do you have?
Yeah, if you're interested in this, Manny, I know you're just giving suggestions. I'm not volunteering you, but I can include you in our conversations. Sure. Okay. Because I've been looking at some sort of way to get some of these things automated, and it's not very clean. I feel like I have to use multiple tools to get what we want. But
yeah, I think like bringing someone into the org might be more of the manual process. But after that, I think if we wanted to, we could do the Probot stuff and then just kind of do some PRs to the repos, and then Probot takes care of all that stuff. So that might be a way to go.
That would be nice. That would be nice. Yeah. Because, and just to bring it up real quick, because there's lots of options here too, right? We use Mergify, so you could use Mergify for some of it. You could use Code Owners, which is GitHub based. We could pull in like Prowl, but then we'd have to like run infrastructure, right? Like there's all these different ideas. Yeah, I see Micah saying, no, don't do that. So
operating a Prowl instance, doing it myself, I don't recommend it for Tinkerbell.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, I looked into it briefly and I was like, well, this doesn't seem like it's a good idea. So, but
yeah,
so
Mergify just uses whatever GitHub says. So like we have it. I think we can like configure more in depth, but I'd rather just kind of deal it with GitHub. That way GitHub is like kind of the source of truth for my stuff.
Sure.
But then yeah, if GitHub's happy, you know, usually Mergify is pretty happy with with repo level provisions and stuff like that.
Yeah. Cool. I will wrangle you in, Manny. Thank you for that.
Yep.
I'd mentioned that we did have that attempt at a Terraform based one in the past too. But if we've got something that's a little more less homegrown, that's probably better.
Cool. Okay, any other comments around the new BMC controller repo? I think the name is Rufio at the moment, is that correct? Is there any concerns with that name? I think now would probably be the time, like, does it, I don't know, is it too close to like roofies or something like that? I don't know, just now
no,
is
the
a
main-
good time to like bring those up before we like invest code into it, right? And then someone comes along and says, why did you use Rufio? That's a terrible name, right?
No, the main issue is not public domain JM Berry Lost Boys IP is okay. Anything that's derivative works that are under copyright, and so Sony Pictures or Disney or anything else, and being a wet blanket here, but like Rufio is not an OG Peter Pan character, and is recently copyrighted IP as opposed to public domain 100-year-old
Right.
works. And so
Right.
Captain Hook, fine. Peter Pan, Wendy, all those things, fine. Never Neverland, great. I'm trying to think of maybe the crocodile on the edge, but yes, anything from recent derivative works that are copyrighted is not great in an open source project. Like with what our like appetite for legal fights is.
Right.
If this becomes as successful as we'd like it to be, then is problem in the future.
Okay, that sounds like the name then is something we should discuss briefly.
Yeah, I mean, that totally makes sense.
So Marcus, maybe don't make that public quite yet.
Marcus, you had some mentions of other repo names, maybe.
Yeah, let's see if any of them were any good. Or you could just go and say them, and then I don't have to say that they were in any way associated with me.
Neverland, Smee. I don't know if he's derivative or not. The leader of the pirates is kind of funny.
Probably compend a list of all the names that are okay somewhere.
Yeah, we've already used
Wikipedia
up some
does
of
have
them.
the helpful
so,
like, sections of
there's
characters in Barry's works.
We can move on.
Yeah,
we can find
there's all
another
the-
name.
Okay.
All the
All right.
Lost Boys, there's Toodles and Nibs and Slightly Curly, the twins.
Okay.
But yeah.
All right,
Eat something
we'll
called
move.
Toodles.
Toodles will be fun.
Yeah,
We'll move this.
If we don't use Rufio and I've created the private project, maybe it just stays there as a blocker so that future generations don't accidentally create it. But then I am curious, like I'm curious how far that goes in terms of what you can and cannot actually use when it relates to, open source hardware provisioning projects. How much confusion were really created.
Unofficially asking a former Disney employee about if this is a thing that they might be weird about. I didn't get they didn't give the impression that would be a thing. Also, it's an open source project. We can rename it if we have a problem. Like, yeah.
That's kind of where I was going with the backronym too. Like if we knew that the IO stood for input output and we just had to solve for what the RUF stands for, then like this has absolutely nothing to do with that movie.
Yeah. Well, we'll come up with a backronym then.
You just put a dot in between RUF.
We could also maybe so let's say we needed a placeholder name. What do we want to call a placeholder name for this, and then we can rename it later if need be, or if desire allows, just so that you have a place to park the code.
I think Rufio is fine. If it's just a placeholder, why not? I mean, short-lived.
Jeremy's box went green. I hear an objection coming.
Nope, must have coughed or creaked my chair.
Okay, going in ignorant, then there's no recording of us having this conversation public. So I'm gonna go with that, and we can easily rename it Mr. Disney.
Awesome. All right, let's jump forward real quick. Hello to Joel. Hey, buddy. Welcome. Pooja, SSH keys in hook. So we brought this up briefly. Any other thoughts anybody has around this idea?
So a thing that I've done in past projects is that baking that file in when you build your live environment. So for any big environment that where you're maintaining your own build of hook or whatever it is, making sure that the repo has like a file that says like, here's where to put your SSH public keys so that it does get baked in and that it works. Then people could build their own and ship it, and they could build updated ones when they need to. That's the simple way. If you like, but a more complicated way would be something that boots up and then fetches from some source of truth at runtime and then drops it in place. You could imagine a workflow action that does that, and therefore it could like, you could bootstrap yourself in some way if you ran an action that has access to the root file system and drops the file into place. You could sort of, assuming the machine behaves and is able to run a workflow, and that you put that into your into some sort of a workflow that you could cause machines to run before they run like their provisioning workflow. You could do it that way. That feels also clunky. So I've now mentioned 2 bad ideas. Now someone else should mention a good idea, and we'll be on our way.
Yeah, I don't have a good idea, but I think there is a challenge between like compiling it in versus passing it via command line args versus pulling it down from a single source. There's trade-offs for all of those, right? And it feels like it kind of depends on what your environment looks like and what you're trying to do. Like, yeah, like if you own all the hardware, or if it's like Equinix Metal where you're giving this hardware away, that might have considerations about like which keys you put on there. I don't know. This is kind of a temporary environment too, which has some interesting effects. I don't know. I feel like I don't know. I don't have a good thought. They all
That's
seem
actually
bad,
a good,
right?
that's a really good example though. So if you think about Equinix Metal's environment, that's a really good argument for not baking it in, because there are 2 different times when the rescue environment gets used. One, the live environment gets used. One is when provisioning machine. During that period of time, having an operator's keys in there, totally fine. Second is, we at Equinix Metal, that is also a rescue environment for customers. Obviously, Hook is not that rescue environment, but our Aussie environment is a rescue environment. If Hook was ever to be a rescue environment in a public environment, you wouldn't want to use something with the vendor's public keys baked into it as the rescue environment, because then by rebooting your instance into the rescue environment, suddenly your vendor could get into the machine, which might have data on it that you don't want their operators accessing during that window. So it would be an argument for, during any particular boot, fetching which keys should be allowed to be used during this time.
There's also the option of going the other way around, right? Something like Teammate, right? Where you can have a container part of Linux kit, like your Linux kit build, right? That kind of reaches out to something. And then if you need to debug, you can then just reach out to that from the other end, right? With some central kind of introducing party, whether it's Teammate or your own hosted Teammate or something similar. I think that might be kind of a separate option, right?
Ooh, that's an interesting idea, because if you could make it optional, like a UDP request, like whether it's there or not, it doesn't matter. Then you could turn it on or off, or use it or don't. That would be kind of a cool idea.
Yeah, that
question.
I mean,
Go ahead, man.
I think the issue with that is like, if we were like, I wouldn't want to bake that into our hook setup, right? Because I don't know if you want to use like the Teammate infrastructure for all this stuff. you know. But
Right,
like,
right. I'm
for me,
not saying teammate in specific, but
Yeah.
if there was some way to do it in some kind of open source way, like, hey, if you stand up this server, Hook will plumb right in. Like, for example, with OTel, this my experience, right? We got OTel plumbed through in a lot of repos. You don't have to use it. You need to turn an environment variable on and have it point to some service you run, and then boom, it goes, right? If you could have a
Yeah.
similar idea, it would be kind of cool. Like, it's there, it's not running until you tell it, to run or something like that, right?
One question that might be worth asking as a clarification is like, Pooja, what is the use case you have in mind, right? Is it a machine boots up, fails to run Tink Worker, and you need to rescue it? Or is it a workflow ran and you need to debug it? Or like, which use cases do you have in mind?
Both, both. For whatever, like any issue that happens during that phase, it would be nice to have SSH access. So just to simplify this quite a bit, like what about something as simple as, once Hook is up and running, it can have a URL passed into it where it can pull the keys from and install for now. And that's optional, if somebody provides a URL that, via boots ends up on Hook, and then Hook tries to pull the keys from there and just tell them, in that case, a customer is kind of free to provide that or not provide that. And then how many ever keys they decide to host there can get installed as authorized keys.
Well, I think it's
Yeah.
kind of two separate situations where like it's kind of similar to what we do in Equinix Metal, right? And I think we don't like that. We're likely to go away from it, right? Where we currently use Aussie as both the provision, deprovision environment, and also like this rescue environment that Nahum mentioned. We're likely to kind of get away from that.
Can you tell me a little bit about exactly what your rescue environment is? It just when like the Tink Worker wouldn't start?
No, so you just mentioned like client, right? So in our case, once once the workflow has gone to completion and we've relinquished the machine to the client, and then they do whatever they do, and they mess up their system and they can't boot, and then they want to kind of debug it, they can go into this rescue environment, which uses the same kind of live environment that we ran to provision and to run Tink or whatever, and to deprovision. And so we know it boots well, it supports the operating system, the hardware and all that. And instead of like going through a workflow, it just drops SSH keys that it fetches from metadata, from Hegel or from in our other case. And then it fetches the SSH keys from there, from EC2, kind of SSH keys. And then SSH is available, and it starts at the SSH server. The client can then go in and do whatever they want within this Alpine rescue environment. So that's kind of,
Okay.
right,
I think you may have just hinted at the answer though, Manny. Like,
Yeah.
like we have this notion of like we have metadata for a machine, right? If in the hardware, if in the payload that you push to Tink server, the right metadata is in place, that there are SSH keys specified that Hegel will serve up, having Hook support fetching SSH keys from Hegel fully integrates within sort of the ecosystem that we have created. It's using ideally a standardized sort of, this is the URL you would hit to fetch it at this particular whatever. All the permissions of when you hit Hegel, it's checking your IP address to identify which machine the request is coming from. All those sorts of things are in place. I think it would be reasonable to have code written that says, fetch this machine's SSH keys from Hegel and drop them into place within a Hook environment. And having that be something that runs right up at boot time seems like a reasonable thing.
Yeah, I guess my clarifying point I would like to know is that similar to like what I just described? Is that what you're thinking of, Pooja? Like, you give the server to somebody and now they need to debug some stuff that they may have messed up later on? Or are we talking about you tried to run Tink Worker to provision or to deprovision or do something else as the operator, and then that failed, and now you want to go and debug that? Because they're kind of different scenarios, and because like kind of like what Jake Nahum mentioned, where if the operator is debugging, then yeah, sure, you want the operator's keys, but you don't really want to have the operator's keys if the client is trying to debug, because you don't want to have access to it. You want to give that peace of mind that we don't have like backdoor access to your server thing.
So in our case, and in our use case and scenario, it's really the operator. And that's pretty much it for now.
And I'm assuming
Which is
that
the
you don't
opposite of
have
what I just described also, because I was talking
Yeah.
about like what I described would be a provision where you've probably presumably pushed the client's keys, but really this is about an operator debugging a failed.
right. Yeah.
But I think the
So-
client's keys kind of encompasses both in a good, mostly seamless way, like going through the Hegel portion.
Right. Yeah, I think it's
Right.
still an option where yeah, that's kind of where we have thought of like Hegel for, like kind of stuffing runtime dynamic information into, and then workflows can get at it and kind of go off from there. And then certainly Hook, if it wants to do some kind of off the beaten path thing, it can kind of get stuff from there, right? You can envision some ops might have access to some machines and some other operators shouldn't because of permissions or whatever, and then that's kind of where that would be useful.
Right.
The other, so I think the other question I have is BMC access, like SOA access, not an option? I know it's kind of sucky because of SSH is nicer, but you can certainly like and you can go into that and then kind of enable SSH and fetch the keys and then go in through SSH otherwise.
Yeah, that's assuming that there's always BMC access. So at least from our side, we're running into scenarios where the operator that's actually doing all this may not have access to BMC or may not be given access to the BMC credentials.
Right. Yeah, I think then like looking into, I think Hegel would probably be like the best way around this, having a container or even part of like the Hook current container, go into and check metadata from Hegel, and then if there's some keys somewhere, fetch them and run the SSH server.
But you might want to have, it occurs to me, you may want separate keys as operator keys versus like infrastructure operator keys versus like consumer of the machine keys at a different spot in the metadata tree, so that if the provision fails, operator has SSH access to the live environment. If it succeeds, the thing that gets laid down for the customer to use is a different set of keys that is not the operator keys.
So yeah, I mean, the thing that gets laid down would be the actual final full-fledged OS, right? Or are you thinking, because that's where the consumer's keys come into picture, right?
Right.
And at least in our scenario, and I know this needs to be more generic, but at least in our scenario, those keys are sort of installed as a part of the whole cluster creation process. So like the final consumer keys are laid down as a part of the Kubernetes cluster creation entire process. So they come in via like a YAML spec for cluster creation that a consumer can provide initially, and then those will get installed on the final, for now, the Ubuntu OS that'll be on these machines. So yeah, that scenario, at least in my case, at least that consumer final client SSH key scenario, I'm less worried about.
Yeah, I think the thought that the one of the goals, I think, I don't know if it's explicit or implicit in Hegel, is the ability for cloud init to boot up when a machine with an Ubuntu like image just dropped on it, for it to boot up if it's properly configured to talk to Hegel, that it would be able to fetch metadata as it would like in an EC2 instance and finish configuring the machine. And that use case is slightly different than this particular operator keys into the provisioning environment.
Yeah, because these operator keys, in my mind, it was mainly just for Hook,
right,
and mainly just bugging in that case. Yeah.
I really like the separation there, that like if there's just something wrong with the hardware, you should not need access to the OS, and you shouldn't be, like, you as vendor should not have any access to it ever. So plumbing keys in through Hegel has the potential to give vendors access to the direct OS, and avoiding that by having Hook use some other system, which that URL could, if the, like, let's say we expose it as vendors, if we expose that URL property to customers, then they could set it to the Hegel URL if they want, or the vendor could set it to a vendor URL, or Tinkerbell hobbyists could set it to their GitHub SSH keys URL. And this way, if the OS actually requires workflows with secret credentials, say to unlock encrypted disks, you're not giving the vendor like that backdoor access to it. So yeah, it also brings into question like how you could keep separate workflows, some that are vendor specific and then some that are customer sensitive.
Sorry, I'm gonna have to interject here. We only got about 9 minutes. This was really great conversation. I highly recommend, if we don't mind, move it to Slack. Let's create a discussion in GitHub or an issue. I think this has got some great potential. So please do that. Apologies for cutting this one short. We do have 2 other topics here. So, okay, moving on. Chris, you've got version tagging.
Yeah, this kind of relates to some of the discussion earlier. It's super minor, maybe not something we need to focus on here, but I noticed that the repos seem to be tagged after the sandbox. So the sandbox goes to a recent release of some description and services get tagged. Does that sound roughly right?
The initial take was to backfill because we didn't have tags on any of the services, but we did have tags on Sandbox. So to backport all of those tags from Sandbox to where which services were, which SHAs the Sandbox was using. So now 0.1, 0.2 through 0. Whatever we're on 6 is synced to what it was in those Sandbox versions. Going forward, there's an issue in, I don't know if it's in proposals or if it's in org. I think it may have been merged in proposals, but it was about semantic versioning. And the strategy there is that we don't have to stay in sync at this point. That would just got us some initial version. So if we're on like 0.15 of Hegel, that's fine.
Okay, well then ignore the topic point because I think that's where I was headed. And then the other thing was I noticed a couple of the main services, their Go versions are still in the Go mods 1.13 or 1. something not supported. Is there any objection to just a holistic, let's upgrade everything to 1.18, that's the latest?
Yeah, I would prefer if we only move because we need something from those newer versions. If we don't need anything, I don't think moving ahead gets us any additional value.
Does it hurt?
No, both ways. I don't think it gets us any value. I don't think it gives us anything either. So you're right. It is kind of, okay, I'll retract my statement.
There were some.
I will. If there's a reason to move, let's move. If there's not, then it's just a code change type of thing, right?
Yeah, exactly.
We have the change log, so we can say if you really need the old version, then here's 0.6 for you.
I think that my concern would be there have been like security sensitive updates in Golang releases at various times, and relative, like, I guess the question is, what pain do we cause by being aggressive about staying on a recent Golang?
So also like those Go, like the Go version, the Go mod doesn't really influence anything. It's just kind of the compiler looks at it and says, oh, I don't support that feature because whatever. But so we're not using that feature, therefore there's no need for it, right?
Sure.
Well, but there's like core library changes, right? Like from like 17 to 18 or something, there's like new IO packages or something like that. And so if someone's using those, it's just plain not going to work. And then the other one I think is if you try and compile, I've never done this, but does somebody know if you try and compile a 1.18 with like 1.16, does it work?
Yeah, as long as you don't have 1.18 like uses, the Go compiler isn't like using isn't gonna error out because your Go.mod has 1.16 or something.
Oh, okay.
Oh, I thought you were asking the inverse. if you had a Go mod 118 and tried to use a Go 116 compiler.
That's what I did ask. Yeah.
Oh, I'm pretty sure that breaks. Does it not?
I
I
think
don't
I've
know.
seen
It would yell
CI.
at you. It would yell at you until you like you could manually fix go.mod and then use the older compiler and it would be fine. But
Right.
that is certainly the go.mod file. The compiler will say, "Am I older than what is supported?" And if so, it'll say, "Hey, just so you know, like I'm too old for this. You should use a new one."
And will it build or will it not build?
Pretty sure it'll refuse to.
I think it refuses.
Oh, it won't build. So that's the biggest concern I would have, because if we're too aggressive, some people aren't willing to move to the new ones until like 1.18.1 or .2 or some of the security bug fixes come out. If we're too aggressive in pushing the version, then people might not be able to build our stuff just because they're like, well, I don't want to go right on to 1.19. I want to wait till it's stable out in whatever. Right?
One thing Chris pointed out is some of our stuff uses stuff that is like no longer supported. So having a floor of a supported release, because also
Right.
like if there is a security vulnerability in an unsupported one, it's not going to get fixed. As long as we're on a supported 1 dot something, then we could go to the latest of 1 dot something that is supported and be relatively confident that there are no security
Yeah,
issues.
for sure. That I 100% agree with for sure.
That's probably the biggest concern for me is making sure we're on a supported Go version, and that the CI is using a supported Go version. I would love to be on the latest. I think everybody in general would like to have the latest, but at the same time, I totally get the concern that you might upset other things. So yeah, 117 I think is the latest. So should we just push to that?
One is the latest. But
So,
you're talking about the latest,
supported,
the oldest supported.
Oldest, latest supported thing. Yeah.
I'm okay with moving, but to 118, but I will bring up one other thing just to bring it up. Some of our linting tools might have some degraded functionality in terms of what it lints. For example, Golang CI lint, Golang, yeah. If I'm not mistaken, they'll work with 118, but they'll stop checking certain things because they haven't put them in place yet. So it's a trade-off to say like, okay, that's fine, but there will be some linting stuff that might actually make it through that we have checks specifically for in 117. So
sure.
That's
So let's not do
FYI.
118. Let's not do 118. Let's just jump 117 because that's supported by the Go team and probably complements the tooling that we have in place and whatnot. So does that sound sensible?
Yeah.
I just think it's useful as a project to just, promote good practice, which is stay up to date on supported stuff, basically.
Sure.
So
Convert the project to
117.9.
generics, 1.18.
Yeah.
So the other thing is this.
That would be a reason not to go to 118, so people don't throw generics in there.
Yeah. One thing that I think we have shell.nix files that in various repositories pinned to various versions of Nix packages, and it may be nice to around the same time make those less divergent and try to get them a little more similar, at least from what they're pinned to, even if it's not the list of packages that it pulls in.
Does Nix have a 1.18? Go 1.18? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and 117. Yeah.
Okay.
As far as I know.
All right, I'll take an action and go and update stuff. That was it.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. Okay, we are right at the top of the hour. Any final thoughts or questions, concerns, jokes? Awesome. Thanks everyone so much for coming. I thought we had a great conversations today. Same time next week, triage party. Just watch your Slack channel for a link. Does that sound fair, Jeremy?
Yeah, we can go that way.
Okay. Slack channel is, and thanks y'all. Have a great week. Take care.
Same to you. Bye for now.
Yep.